I am Emma, and this is my beautiful assistant, my beautiful friend, Pam. And together we got a pretty special guest today. Who is it, Pam? You can do the honors.
Oh, and it is an honor and an honor for all of you because you get to hear me speak German, which I don't do. We have Ludwig Van Beethoven.
Yay!
Now, as an American, I would say Ludwig, and I've just learned that that's American sound, Ludwig. Anyway, Mr. Beethoven, what an honor for you to join us today. You, if we don't already know, just as an introduction, as a German composer and pianist, you were a crucial figure in that transition between the classical and the romantic era in classical music. And you remain one of the most recognized and influential of all composers, which is fascinating in itself. So welcome, and apologies for messing up the pronunciation of your name. I think I'll stay with Mr. Beethoven.
He says, thank you for having me, and no, don't worry about it, he says. Anything is fine with me.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
I have to say, his energy is very reserved. So unlike some of the other people that I've interviewed, usually I talk to them about a week and a half, and they are always very energetic when they come in and they share things with me. Ludwig is a little bit more conserved. He feels a little bit more withdrawn, not so open to just have, chitter chat kind of mode. But it feels to me like he's a very wise entity. So I'm super excited that he decided to join us today as well.
That's amazing, that your energy is sort of shy. Does it feel like a shy?
It's not really shy. It's more like reserved. Like he, and I know that is he's just projecting the energy he was in his human form. This is not his spiritual form. But he just feels reserved. It just feels like, despite the fact that he really was loved by many, at the same time, he wasn't deeply loved, so he would withdraw within. He would do everything very introvert and process everything very introvert. So it almost feels like his music was his only way to unleash himself onto the world, and that everything besides his work, he became very introvert as a person.
Well, you did indeed unleash yourself by music. No argument there. Just to start at the very beginning, Robbie Tasmania had the question, what is the actual date of your birth?
Okay, he's showing me a calendar at this moment. So he's highlighting December 15th, 1770, and he's showing me that it was already dark outside, so it's towards the evening of the day.
So do we have that date correct?
No, we don't.
Oh, good question, Robbie. So
Yes.
That's corrected.
Yes.
Now I have to apologize for messing up the questionnaires names. So sorry. Homanyan Gardezi. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
He says, my childhood was one of pain, grief, poverty. He says it was one of feeling imprisoned within my own home and within my own mind. My personal thoughts and my desires, any chance of creating and growing my own identity, my own personality, was really stripped away from me by the time that I turned 4 years old. He says, because my father's own self-hate, his self-disappointment, and his deep-rooted sense of despair turned him more into a dictator rather than a father. He says he placed the salvation of our entire family upon my shoulders, and I needed to become the one to help the family out of poverty, and I needed, according to him, raise the status of our family. Now, all of that was imprinted into my mind from a very early age. He would beat me. He would scream at me. He would lock me up in small, dark spaces. And I hated him, but I feared him even more. My mother loved me, but she was plagued with a constant state of fatigue and depression. So she wasn't strong enough to protect me from my father, and their relationship was never based on love either. So expressing love or showing any kind of affection was non-existent. And on top of that, she dealt with a ton of grief in a very unhealthy way. He's almost making me cry, I'm sorry. He's just making me feel the pain. It's so sad. He says, you see, my mom's first loss was when she was only 16 years old. She had married a man who she had a son with, but died in infancy. 2 years later, her husband died as well. And a few years after that, she married my father, with whom she lost 4 infant children. So she blamed herself for all of these losses and never really recovered from that. She would hurt herself. She would cut herself. As if she was punishing herself for their deaths. So my mother was never able to provide me with real love and care. And so my survival solely depended on me and on becoming an independent. Also, some called me a child prodigy, but my abilities came from nonstop work and practice. It was slave labor. But the music eventually ended up becoming the only love that I truly experienced. So in a way, my childhood was about losing my identity or not even having the ability to become my own identity, but becoming an idea of other people. That is what my childhood was like.
Were you an only child?
No, I had 3 brothers who survived into adulthood. I had several sisters who passed along at a very early age, and I also had a half-brother who was born before me, like I mentioned, who died before I was born.
And what was your relationship like with your brothers?
let's just say that we all were in survival mode, trying to survive the tyranny of my father, trying to survive the sadness and the grieving of my mother. My brothers looked up to me to take care of them. And so that is what I did.
So were they younger than you?
They were younger than me, yes.
Okay. Rena Clark asked the question if there was any sibling rivalry.
No, not at all. Only, like I said, only myself and my two younger brothers reached adulthood. My oldest sister, Maria, only lived for 6 days. I had a younger sister, Anna, who lived for 4 days as well. I had a brother, Franz, who lived for 2.5 years. A sister, Margaret, who died when she was less than 1.5 years old. And then my mother died as well, only a little bit over 1 year. So the rivalry wasn't really present because we were all holding on to each other to survive our home and to survive our childhood. Now, as we grew older, I did become overly protective of my brothers, and I would create struggles and I would create drama where I really shouldn't have. But I was taught from such an early age to be the man of the house, to keep everyone safe. And so for me, it almost became like an obsession to protect them. So even after they reached adulthood, I would mingle, I would intervene, I would advise them. And the advice was not always well received because I was trying to control their decision making. So as we grew older, the relationship changed. The connections faded a bit, but we always stayed brothers. So rivalry, I would say no.
My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is you had a piano in your home and that your grandfather actually was quite the pianist, and your father couldn't live up to his father's expectation of a musical ability and pressured you into that. Is that correct? That it sort of, would you credit your music coming from your grandfather and then your father pressuring you into the music that he himself could not do?
We all had abilities to create music. What my father lacked was the discipline to do so. And so because of the constant pressure of my grandfathers on my father, he would crumble under the pressure. And so he was considered to not be as talented as he should have been. And so that left my father with a sense of being unworthy. Mm-hmm. My grandfather would criticize him, would humiliate him, would bring him down in any way or form, hoping to get him more stimulated, to get him more pressured into performing. But unfortunately, it never worked out in the way that my grandfather had hoped. And so because my father only knew that, he decided to make his firstborn, which was me, or at least his firstborn son, to make the next prodigy.
He put that pressure on you.
He did.
Okay.
Everything, if you want to look at it from a spiritual perspective, it was all part of a bigger plan. I was supposed to become a musician. But if you want to look at it from a human perspective, it was really forced upon me. But in the end, it turned out to be the only salvation.
By the time you were an adult, or a young man, would you say you were fairly well grounded in music?
Despite the effort and the work that I had to put into it, I did have a natural sense for creation. So the music was taught to me, but putting music together and creating new musical pieces in my mind started developing from an early age on a very natural basis. So I would say that I was a well-played musician by the time I was 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. So it was, at what point, my understanding is at some point, and I think you were quite young, you met Mozart, and he, I understand, was quite willing to work with you, but that didn't work out. Can you tell us about that?
I met him as a young man, young boy, and I went to go see him as he had heard of me. And I met him very shortly. He didn't really feel like he was that keen on seeing me at that day. But once he heard me play, he was very impressed. Unfortunately, my mother became ill. And so I only got to see him for one day, and I already had to go home to be with my mother. And unfortunately, I never got to see him again after that. So it was a very short, very brief encounter that left a big impression on me. He was my inspiration. I looked very much up to him. So he was my idol, if you would like to call it that. And so getting to meet him and getting to see the expression on his face after I played was priceless and gave me the courage to continue to do what I was doing. So in a way, he became my inspiration, my drive, despite the very short visit that we had.
So you never had any contact with him after that initial visit?
He died shortly after.
Okay. All right. So let's see.
He's laughing. He says if we would have had the internet or a telephone, that might have worked.
Wow. Pamela, I got that name. Pamela Shen. Did you ever get married, or did you remain single?
He says, no, I never got married. I wanted to, more than you can ever know. But he says all love relationships were very confusing to me because I never really experienced love before, true love, that is. And so I fell in love all the time, constantly, because as soon as someone showed some kind of interest, or as soon as a lady would show some kind of affection, I would create this overly romanticized idea of that relationship, and that is how that's how desperate I was to really feel love. So I fell in love with a lot of unavailable women, or women who were above my status, so I was never good enough for them. Because after all, I was merely a musician, which was not like it is now. Also, everything I did with so much passion that it scared not only myself, but it also scared others. And so this passionate obsession drove everyone away from me. And a lot of times I fell in love with women, again, who weren't available, not because I picked them out that they weren't available, but because I lived completely 100% following my passion and not so much my mind. And so I would basically set myself up over and over again for a broken heart. So I followed my passion, not my reasoning. And that is why I fell in love with whoever showed me some kind of affection or some kind of interest in my personal being.
And what a different experience for you after your family relationships. To understood, right?
It was hard. It was hard to fully understand the concept of a love relationship.
Well, absolutely. Nancy Klokaka is asking, was Josephine your immortal beloved, and were you the biological father of her child, Monona?
He says, if you're referring to the letter.
Yes, I believe that's the letter.
Yeah, he says, then no, she is not. However, I did love her. I loved all the women. But Monona was, in fact, my daughter. I wrote the letter for Antoni. I knew I would never send it because I knew my love would always stay unanswered. But I had come to a point of desperation, I would say. So I wrote it more as a testament of my love for her, and I was hoping that by eternalizing my love for her on paper, that the heavens would grant me the wish to experience that unconditional love. Now, unfortunately, it never happened for me during that lifetime. And the only experience of unconditional love was my connection to Mother Earth, nature, and its subtle harmonies, which I channeled into my creations. Because nature lives in a constant state of musical frequency. And for some reason, somehow, when I was surrounded by nature, I could tap into that music that the universe is eternally projecting. And so that was the only love that I ever truly experienced, was being cradled and surrounded by the arms of Mother Earth.
Interesting. Okay. Well, the question of your Immortal Beloved was all over the place. I read.
It is a big mystery.
That's been a huge mystery of your life. Heather Pierce wants to know if there was ever a time that you were worried about your success as a composer.
Yes. When I was younger and the survival of my family was placed upon me. But after I returned to Vienna for the second time, and I received much more approval from the upper class, and I started to receive more work than I could really handle, then those worries started to fade away. So only when I was younger and I had a family that depended on me and my income.
Just as any of us would, right?
Yes.
Okay, Beth Sellers Ferguson says, I was surprised to discover that you developed hearing loss during your lifetime. How did this affect your music, and how did you overcome or compensate for this?
He says, when my hearing became affected, it influenced more my mental and physical health than it did my music, to my own surprise. I went crazy from the constant noise in my ears, so I started to drink heavily to try and silence it.
Did that work?
Not really, unless I passed out, which happened on occasion. He's showing me this going, it's kind of funny. He says, I became very frustrated and depressed because I felt that the only thing that gave me some sense of self, the one thing that gave me identity, was slowly being stripped away from me again without my approval. Just like my father stripped me of the chance to develop my own self. And so I became withdrawn. I closed myself off from the world. And also music was the only thing I was good at because I was never taught anything else. So it frightened me because I had no other means of financial survival. And so I started to struggle with suicide thoughts. I stopped taking care of myself. I started to abandon my physical hygiene, and I lived in filth because I gave up on life. But to my surprise, the music continued to play in my head. I could hear it in my mind. So I discovered that I didn't need my ears to write music. You see, everything starts with a subconscious thought, an awareness, a desire or an idea to see or hear something which has not manifested itself yet into your reality. And so even if it hasn't been created yet into the physical, it is still already existent in the universe because you have created it in your mind. So the music was very real and very present in my mind. It was just too bad that I couldn't fully enjoy the final result with my physical body. So either way, a very strong feeling inside of me which said that I wasn't done yet with sharing my creations to the world, that I wasn't done yet with expressing God's source through my music, prevented me from giving into those suicide thoughts and prevented me from giving up. So despite the fact that I was constantly in a state of depression, I didn't cave in, I didn't surrender to the idea or to the, yes, we can say the idea of death, until after I felt that I had given everything I had to give.
And you're touching on this a little bit, but maybe we can expand on it. Marie Lappy Capio is asking what inspired you. Can you say more about that? I know it sounds like Mozart inspired you, and the pure simplicity of what was in your mind musically was an inspiration. Can you say more about that? What inspired you?
He says, of course. He says, like I said, nature, the divine order and harmony of nature. He says, you see, my creativity didn't come in these grand aha moments like it does for some. The creation of my music was a process of consistently bringing in abstract ideas into the physical world. And in order for me to do that, I would maintain and discipline myself in living a life of routine and structure. So every day, at specific times, I would take these long walks in the forest, armed with a paper and a pencil, so I could write down musical thoughts and inspiration. Being in nature really cleared my mind. It cleared my thoughts, and it created space for the heavens to send me ideas. It created space for nature to sing to me. Nature would change the sounds and the notes in my mind. It would make me feel connected to something beautiful and something loving. And so nature was a constant, like an eternal friend that would always be there for me to heal and embrace me with beauty and peace, and who would offer calmness within a mind who was always on the edge of self-destruction. And it was the only way for me to reach, and I think the only way for divine source, divine creation to reach me. So, as I said before, nature sings. Trees, flowers, animals communicate with a vibration that resonated in my mind as melodies. And so, knowing now from my spiritual perspective, I understand that I was channeling that frequency, and that channeling helped me to create and receive pieces of musical inspiration. And so, in a way, I guess my inspiration, or the true inspiration, was just source talking through me by using the nature around me.
Did you know that in your human existence, or was that something that you realize now? Because
I was not aware of that in my human existence. All I knew from my human perspective is that when I went into the forest and I surrounded myself with trees that could tell more stories than any human could ever tell, I became calm and I received harmonies in my mind. I could hear music as I strolled along the trees.
it's interesting because Don Groendyke is saying, now that you are able to see the full picture, was there a spiritual reason or lesson to be learned from your loss of hearing? And it sounds like you've been describing that. But if there was a lesson in it, was the lesson achieved?
The deafness was more an attracted result, a manifested result of stepping away from my life lesson. You see, my biggest life lesson that I had designed for myself was the desire to overcome abuse and find and experience a sense of acceptance and self-love. To find the love that I was always seeking outside of myself within, and in this way inspiring people by my own personal journey, my own personal victories, and through my music, of course. So self-acceptance and self-love was necessary to heal. But as I started to go more and more into the opposite direction and into self-destruction, this lower energy started to manifest itself into hearing problems, forcing me to become isolated from the outside world. So I would have no other choice than to find some kind of self-awareness and self-acceptance within my own mind, within my own self. That is what the purpose was of my deafness.
Interesting. Lori Bentz. I was talking about this with my son-in-law today, how different, different music was at that time for you and at this time for us. Lori Bentz is asking, were the popular composers of your day treated like rock stars are today? How does that, it's like we have the internet now and that changes things, but what were some similarities or differences?
I guess in a way, it was similar. We received respect, we received admiration, but we also received criticism, and we felt a huge pressure from those who would hire us to create these musical pieces for them. Because if you look at music now, many of the artists are playing for themselves. I mean, they're still playing, they have a contract, and there are certain obligations to that. But I guess in my days, people were you would get hired to create symphonies. You would get hired. So you were always in function of another person who would then comment and criticize what you were doing. So I guess in a way it's very similar, but in my time, no matter how talented you were, there was never a guaranteed income. And our financial intake was okay, but not as excessive as it is today. So you would not become rich or wealthy by doing what we did. We were just able to support ourselves and live comfortably. I guess those are the biggest differences.
But fans, the way people would receive you or perceive you, is that similar? Did you feel that love and adoration for your music, for who you were at that time?
We did feel it. I think we had it easier than the artists do today, because they are dealing with fans from all over the world, trying to get some kind of glimpse, some kind of connection with them. We were dealing with the people in our environment who were admirers of our work. However, everything was still very civilized and proper. And so we would get invited to parties, we would get invited to social gatherings, but it never got to a point where you were attacked or you were chased around. I think the artists today have to not only deal with criticism, but they are also dealing with being stripped from their identity in a way and being stripped from their privacy. I don't feel like we experienced that in such a degree that they are doing now.
Right. No tabloids.
No paparazzi.
Paparazzi.
No people chasing you around with cameras, with phones. A lot of times people didn't even recognize me when I was on the street. I got arrested a few times from being drunk, and they just thought that I was a bum, that I was a homeless person. And
Were you then treated differently when they realized who you were?
I would tell them who I was, and they would just laugh because they wouldn't believe that such a great composer would end up looking the way that I did and smelling the way that I did.
Amazing. Get more into your career. Marnie Naples, could you please tell us about your Ninth Symphony? How did you become so inspired by a poem to create such a beautiful symphony? Did it all come to you at once or piece by piece? Could you please speak to your creative process?
He's saying, I will try my best. That's a hard question to answer. He says, first of all, I loved the Ode to Joy poem, very much so. And I already had the idea to turn it into a musical piece somehow when I was in my early 20s. And so over the years, I would get ideas, but nothing really stuck. Nothing really felt good at those times. And so it just got postponed year after year after year. And so it is really hard to explain the creation process because it was never a linear process for me. Mm-hmm. And it came with many corrections and do-overs. But I prayed to the heavens to help me pour my last remaining energy and sounds into a final work of creation and inspiration, because I was just tired of being alive. And so I had pleaded to the gods to release me from this heavenly task of recreating music, because that was part of my journey to change music. Let me explain that a little bit. I was not here just to merely create music. I was here to express emotions. And so music used to be just a lineup of notes that sounded pretty. When I started creating, I expressed all my anger, all my frustration, all my love that had nowhere to go into that work. And so when they listened to my music, they would get visions, they would get feelings, they would get experiences in their mind. They would see what I was letting them hear. And that was very different than what they were used to. And that is why it spoke so much to everyone. Because my music, he says, my music magnified their creativity and their emotional body. And so going back to the question, I really pleaded for them to help me so they could release me from that heavenly task of recreating music and expressing heaven's voices through these divine frequencies. And I asked them to help me finish it so I could feel like I had fulfilled my task here on earth, and I could finally start the journey to surrender to the idea of going home. And so in this symphony, I needed an end that no one would ever forget.
Well, you got it.
And so God's source reminded me of that poem that had always spoken to me, that had always spoken to my heart, but I could never place. And so the poem resurfaced into my mind, and it created a very memorable ending to, in my view, an ending of my era. That is what I can explain at this moment. But it's really hard to explain an artist's creative process, as it is not a technique. It is a feeling. They are intuitive senses, ideas, divine inspiration is what I would call it.
So, absolutely. Rosalind Cordero. Hello, Mr. Beethoven. She's excited. In your lifetime, and even after your death, you were often compared to Mozart. How did you feel being compared to him? And did he influence your music in any way? You touched on that a little bit, but maybe the comparison piece, what's that like?
Well, he says, as I explained before, he was an inspiration to me. But when it came to people comparing us, despite my admiration for him, I did not enjoy that, because I believed that we are all artists painting with different brushstrokes. And so our creations should and cannot ever be compared, because as every individual piece of art, whether it is a painter, whether it is a musician, any type of creative processing, any type of creative manifestations hold unique frequencies of energy of that creator in the art. I don't know if that makes sense, he says, but basically, when we create something, that piece becomes a part of the creator. It becomes a part of their identity. And so the piece of art takes over the frequency of the creator. Therefore, you cannot compare it, as it contains and holds the unique frequency of that individual who put his heart and soul into the creation of it.
That's a great message. Let's just all stop the comparison.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great message. Thank you for that. Paja, did you ever think your music was going to carry on past your death and influence future generations as it has? In other words, did you have a legacy?
Well, I had hoped that I could live on forever with the art that I created, because I never had the opportunity to experience unconditional love in this human incarnation. And as I eventually gave up on love, I knew that my music would be my only way to ever become a part of someone's heart, to have a chance to truly move someone in an intimate way, and to be eternally loved by another. Now, little did I know that I was loved all along. I just didn't understand or realize that until the day I went home and transitioned. God loves you all, and you are and forever will be whole and complete. So don't wait to learn that lesson until you come home. Don't be like me.
Learn it now.
Learn it now, today. It is so, and that will never change, no matter what you do or create for yourself in this journey.
Thank you. Naledi Ketlakwetsky. Sorry. Tough names here today.
We have tough names, yes.
Can you speak to the relationship between music and mathematics?
He says, in my perspective, music and mathematics are not as closely connected as some people want to believe, but they are both expressions of sacred geometry. They are God's given tools to make sense of a reality that seems so confusing and feels so separative to us all. So music and mathematics really are universal languages through which the world and the universe around us makes more sense. And they're also a tool for God to speak to us and connect us with our truest self, which is that of eternal, unlimited, and unconditionally loving beings of light. So I would say that music is closer related to physics than to mathematics, because music is the study, the use, and the expression of the physics of vibrational energy and sound. So music raises people's energy frequencies, therefore opening and creating connections to higher vibrational beings and the entire universe. So certain sounds, certain vibrations can activate your third eye and reactivate the pineal gland, which will enhance your connection to the universe and to God's source. But they can also offer healing and compassion. And in some cases, music can completely, he says, restabilize the energies within your soul and within your human body. So if I would have to relate music, it would definitely be to physics and healing, he says. That has more in common.
In your afterlife, Roxana would like to know, what are you doing now? What do you do in spirit?
I am mostly assisting young children to think outside of the box musically and to use their music to bring light and healing to themselves and to the world. So, of course, I will help anyone who requests my assistance. But please know that you need to do the work. I can only inspire you and help you with creative thoughts and feelings. But you need to always be willing to take the steps to release those fears and insecurities and to embody spiritual wisdom and principles so you can then become the highest and most clear version of yourself, he says.
Chiara Chandramas. Is your love for music a constant in your other lives that you might have had, or was your life as Beethoven the only life you had as a musician?
He says, I believe that music will always be an important part of any human incarnation because it is God's source speaking to us and through us, healing our hearts and pain and inspiring new dreams and new creations. So yes, music will be important in every human lifetime, including all of mine.
Interesting. Olga de Sousa Cross, are you incarnated in this current timeline?
He says, no, not in this timeline. My energy, however, is very present in your timeline because I am helping the new generations of children to use creativity and music to bring healing to the collective, to the world. And my work is still to this day healing and inspiring humanity to see and experience divine source and its unconditional love for all of us through my music. So know this, whenever you listen to my music, I become a part of your now moment because you are tapping into my energy that was forged within my music. So in that moment, I am right there with you. And the sound vibration reaches your heart. So when that happens, when you can feel my music inside your soul, I become one with you. So know that I might not be with you in a physical form, but I am always with you in spiritual form.
Well, you've been with me a lot because I've been listening to your music recently, and it's just blows me away. Just blows me away, all the layers of emotion. You know, there's happy and sad and angry, and every emotion is touched, and it's fascinating.
He says, yes, my music is the expression of who I was in those moments.
Incredible. Gia Myers, what was it like for you to hear once you transitioned? Was it like you were never deaf to begin with, or did you feel a sense of amazement or relief, that experience of going home and hearing's no longer an issue?
He's showing me a big smile, so I think he was pretty happy. I'm just right now. I'm like, oh, he's like, I can't stop smiling. He says it was a glorious day because I was not only healed, but I also felt an overwhelming love without any conditioning or restrictions or any demands. So the love that I was always searching for but never found in my incarnation as Ludwig, all of a sudden, from 1 second to the next, was completely devouring myself, was completely, it's so hard to explain in human words, but there's this instant sense of belonging and being at home in a loving family. And so another great experience after transitioning was that I finally got to enjoy my work that I never got to enjoy during my time of deafness. And so that was a nice surprise and still brings a smile in my heart today that I was able to create something so intense, so beautiful from my mind.
Yes.
And not from my body. So that was a beautiful experience, and transitioning was relief.
Relief and being able to have the pure bliss of what you had created.
It was relief because I could finally see where all this pain, where it all led up to. When I was alive, I didn't fully understand that all my pain created that beautiful music with the love of God, source. And now I could see that the pain was no longer pain, but it was beautiful harmonies that moved people's hearts and sparked love and admiration within each and every one who listened to my music.
And still, to this day.
Yes.
To this day. It
Still
didn't end.
Day.
It hasn't ended. A couple other questions. Hannah Minner, first she says, I'm so excited to hear from Mr. Beethoven. See all the excitement around you. Her question is, as an aspiring opera singer, I experience a lot of frustration from being misunderstood because of the development of my voice. What is your advice for musicians and artists who feel misunderstood or blocked in their progress?
He says, I would say the only frustration you experience is caused by the lack of self-belief and a constant comparison with others. You're a unique being, so embrace your uniqueness and your unique voice and give it all of you. Give it all of your focus. Give it all of your energy and create self-discipline to become the master of your vocal muscles. If you want something bad enough, you need to allow it to become you. So don't give up. Release the restrictive thoughts and feelings and embrace your own divinity. Allow it to fully absorb who you are. So my advice is admire yourself, admire your uniqueness, and absorb the divinity that's within.
And that really answers, I think, the next question is similar from Alice Jarman Powis, that she says, I always wanted to compose classical music, but feel as though I don't have the intellectual tools to do it. What is your advice to those who would like to compose but don't quite know how? It sounds like
well, let me add to that. He says, music is not intellectual. It's spiritual. It's emotional. Music is present in all of us, in our souls. It's who we are. So compose from the heart, not from the head. Experiment with sound, and then the notes will follow automatically. So go into nature. Try and hear the music of the world around you. Allow it to seep in while you bring your mind at ease. Because with a busy mind and with not being present in the now moment, you will miss out on the divine ideas of music and composing that will be sent to you. So calm the mind, connect to the world around you, and allow, it really is a surrendering process. Allow the music to find you instead of you desperately trying to control the music to come to you. I would like to end, he says, I would like to end by expressing the importance of feeling passion, because it is the embodiment of divine communication. It is God's source expressing itself through you with a means to show its unconditional love for you and for your creation. So find your own uniqueness through which you express the eternal and unconditional love of the Creator, whether that is in the way you love and care for others, or whether it is you sharing your unique talents to the world, whether it is you sharing your gifts with the community around you. Always keep with you that everything you do and create in this lifetime is equally valuable and important for the expansion and creation of the collective. Whether you are a waiter or a singer, whether you are a nurse or a lawyer, no matter what it is that you are doing at this moment, do it well and do it wholeheartedly with the knowing that you are part of a grand plan and that you are equally important and always loved. Now, if your heart is not resonating with what you are doing at this moment, then you need to change it without fear and without expectation, but with an open heart to receive the guidance to lead you to your soul path, to your passion. He says, he's laughing, to your passion that is usually suppressed by the time you become 4 years old. So try and rediscover the passion and allow it to show you the way to abundance, love, and joy. That is what I would like to pass on to everyone listening at this moment.
Thank you. Words we all need to hear. Message, what a great message. Thank you for that.
He says, I love you all. And so don't be afraid to reach out, because I will be part of your journey. All you need to do is listen to your heart.
And your music.
Listen to my heart. Listen to my heart and let it move your heart.
It does, obviously.
I feel like he's moving away. Well, thank you, Pam, for joining me today.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
This was a lot of fun. This is a lot of fun. Although I felt very calm and like calculated. That's the energy I felt. But I'm happy that he came through and he stepped forward for us. And he was a brave soul. That's all I have to say. He was a brave soul that made beautiful music.
And gave us today what I perceive as beautiful messages. What beautiful messages he gave, rather than to simply answer a question. He was so loving and thoughtful and gracious in his responses. It was wonderful to hear his messages.
Yeah. Well, our next guest is going to be Karen Carpenter. Pam's really excited about Karen.
I can say Karen Carpenter.
Please like and subscribe. We love you. And we'll see you guys next time.